The Long Road by Wolfland. Chapter 9. Resolution. Pokemon Trainer's Handbook Tip number 22. Pokemon can live in a wide variety of environments. Trainers who wish to see many different types of Pokemon should be on the lookout for various types of ecosystems and even microclimates. Be sure to be prepared for any type of terrain you may come across. As someone who preferred to spend his time primarily on or within the Earth, Steven never thought he'd utter such words about flight. But the view of the ocean from Skarmory's back truly was exhilarating. Incredible, he breathed, his voice quickly lost on the wind. The early spring skies had cooperated that day, and only a few small clouds hung low beneath his feet, allowing the glistening waves to sparkle in the morning light far below. He'd never imagined that the sprawling city of Lilycove could feel so minuscule as it hung behind him only as a multicolored smudge, an afterthought on the canvas of endless blue. Spinning his gaze back around, he could see the outline of Moss Deep slipping up from the water. Lush green danced around its edge, no doubt from the famous mangrove swamps that circled the island city. The signature rocket of the Space Center stood jutted out above the rocky cliffs, and Steven couldn't hide his excitement at the sight. In all his travels, he had never been to Moss Deep before, and the thrill of his first glimpse set his heart aflutter. He had been waiting to make this trip ever since he'd set foot on Lilycove's eastern shore, and been told he'd need a new Pokemon that could traverse the oceans of Hoenn. And now that he had earned the flying type's trust, Steven finally mustered the courage to make this voyage with his new and final teammate. Skarmory surely had the stamina to make the flight from Lilycove to Moss Deep while carrying the weight of both him and his pack. That's not what had Steven worried. He had been concerned that if Skarmory's temper flared while they were over the open ocean, there wouldn't be a good place to quickly and safely land to try to defuse the situation. But after spending nearly the entire winter training with the bird, he was assured by the rest of his Pokemon that Skarmory had warmed up to their group, enough that its urge to rebel mid-flight had been quashed. Still, his grip on the steel-clad flyer's back was probably tighter than necessary. Thankfully, Skarmory didn't seem to mind. Wind whipping through his hair, not even the chill of the cooler atmospheric air could dampen Steven's spirits. The newfound freedom of flying meant that he was no longer bound to schedules or ferry travel. With a way to hop to the different islands of eastern Hoenn all on his own, there was nothing left to stop him from claiming the last few gym badges that were formerly out of his reach. Soon, Moss Deep swelled into existence beneath him, and Steven gently urged Skarmory into a wide turn that brought them across the southern tip of the island. Peering down past Skarmory's gleaming wing, he spotted a cluster of buildings that rose above the mangroves, perched on the rocky cliffs. As Skarmory continued to bank, the center of the city quickly vanished from view behind the Space Center's towering structure. Eyes wide, Steven marveled at the rocket from as close as he dared fly. But beyond the rocket's outline, something else caught Steven's eye. A singular hunched landmass rose out of the ocean just to the north of the island, gently cradled by wide sandbars on either side. Squinting into the wind, the unmistakable shadow of a cave entrance peeked out of the shallow tide. Excitedly tapping on Skarmory's neck, Steven motioned for his flyer to head for the cave. With its head cocked to one side, Skarmory eyed its trainer's giddy grin and decided it was just best to accept his strange perchant for wanting to head into the depths of the earth every time they landed somewhere. Destination set, Skarmory obediently made another wide banking turn before touching down with a skidding landing in the wet sand. Fervently shaking its wings and preening at its sandy claws, Steven quickly dismounted his flyer and dug a cloth and several berries from his pack. Patting the bird's steel crest, Stephen offered the asperberries it seemed so fond of, eager to stay on Skarmory's good side. As it happily chomped on the sour snack, Skarmory was all too keen to let Stephen clean and polish its feathers as an extra reward for carrying them across the ocean. Seeing his newest Pokemon so calm after their longest flight yet, Stephen decided to press his luck a bit more. "Wanna see what's inside?" At the seemingly innocent question, Skarmory immediately stopped munching and snapped a fierce glare that threw daggers, even with juice dribbling down its beak. Stephen tried to give it a convincing smile, but Skarmory's narrow gaze held steady, warning its trainer to drop the subject entirely. Stephen got the gist. Such a proud bird was meant for the open skies, not underground caverns. "Sorry, I just thought you might—" But Skarmory's short screech and a clack of its beak served to punctuate the conversation. "Right. Although, I have to at least give you my thanks for carrying me this far, Skarmory." Ducking his head in gratitude, Stephen watched as Skarmory straightened to its full height before returning the motion. He was glad that even if his flyer would never warm up to his favorite pastime, there was a respectful understanding between them now. The light of the recall beam faded out, and Stephen smiled at the Pokeball in his hand. Rest up for now. Turning his attention towards the mouth of the cave, Stephen could feel anticipation welling up in his chest. His eyes darted excitedly over the mouth of the cave as his boots sank lightly into the wet sand. Too preoccupied with examining the rocky entrance that loomed overhead, he didn't notice the set of faint footprints already leading into the cave. The expanse of Shoal Cave was quickly unveiled from the generous amount of daylight bouncing in through the entrance. Rather than a soaring roof like Granite Cave, Shoal Cave's ceiling was dangerously low, and Stephen found it very fortunate that there was a distinct lack of stalactites, or else he might have had to crouch as he moved further into the cave. But he soon discovered that the ceiling height wouldn't be an issue, as the sandy shelf at the entrance quickly dropped off as the cavern sunk down into the earth, revealing a deep pit with water-worn tunnels bored into its sides. The depth of the sudden drop caused Stephen's stomach to flip as a chunk of sand came loose from beneath his boot and cascaded down the cliff face, where it eventually crumbled and stuck to the moisture-slick rocks below. In a flash, Matang appeared at Stephen's side, and the pair quickly descended to the lowest level of the cave. The strong smell of the ocean hung in the air, but it wasn't unpleasant. The temperature at the bottom of the cavern was cool, combating the musky smell of exposed tidal plants that clung to the rocks all around. Stephen frowned as they approached the tunnel at the back of the cavern. "Sorry, Matang. It looks like this passage is too narrow for you to fit." Matang rattled a sigh of disappointment as its red eyes swept over the craggy opening. Tall and narrow, there was no realistic way it could slide through the opening, even as it tilted vertically on its side in a test fit. "I'll call you back out as soon as there's space." Stephen's expression was apologetic as his partner vanished into its ball. Deftly slipping through the narrow entrance, Stephen discovered the tunnel proved even to him to be a tight squeeze, and on several occasions he found it necessary to swing his pack from his shoulder and sidestep his way through the smallest portions. Interestingly enough, he found that such sections provided some great up-close views of the cave's layers, and Stephen was intrigued to find several different kinds of crystal formations lacing through the rock. Calcite and salt deposits were to be expected. This was a sea cave after all, but upon closer inspection, one of the crystals appeared to be less mineral in nature. Was that ice? His quiet question echoed off the narrow walls of the tunnel, but the section he was currently traversing proved to be too narrow for him to anything but sidle past. Stephen cursed his momentary misfortune. He would have to inspect and collect samples from another portion of the cave. After a few more claustrophobic feet, which he didn't mind all that much, the hewn walls of the tunnel peeled away to reveal a second, larger cavern. His first step into the space was met with a resounding crunch, and Stephen looked down as he withdrew his boot in surprise. The ground of this particular cavern was littered with shells. Some appeared relatively fresh, still holding their rich color, but most had been worn down by waves and time, left brittle and white, and easily shattered underfoot. "Matang, you have to see this." And now that there was room, Stephen held true to his word and released his partner once again. Before it fully materialized, Matang already was looking about in amazement. Neither trainer nor Pokemon had seen this many shells in one place before. Hoenn shores weren't particularly known for washing up many treasures, and Stephen's hand came to his chin as he briefly wondered if some natural phenomenon could be responsible for depositing all of them in the depths of this cave instead. But his thoughts were interrupted by the clattering of shells and a rattling call from his starter. Following Matang's pointed claw, he caught sight of a squat silhouette moving across the field of shells. Bringing out a small flashlight, Stephen dimmed the beam to its lowest setting and aimed it toward the activity. The light danced over white shells and brown rock before striking something colorful, yellow with a splash of orange and two beady blue eyes. Both Stephen and Matang blinked in surprise. A Snowrunt? The tiny ice creature froze, caught in the beam, its hands clutching a particularly impressive-looking shell. Stephen held the beam steady as he kneeled down so as not to frighten the little Pokemon any more than they already had. But as he settled into a crouch, a shell snapped beneath his boot, and the Snowrunt uttered a startled snort and bolted. "Ah! Snowrunt, wait!" Fumbling as he moved to follow the fleet-footed Pokemon, a sharp shell fragment dug into his knee, and Stephen wobbled with discomfort. Unfortunately, this also sent the flashlight beam dancing across the cavern, where it swept through a group of nesting Golbat. Matang quickly noticed what its trainer had done, and it chattered a loud warning. Catching sight of the approaching swarm, whatever hope Stephen had that his Pokemon's echoing cry might have deterred the restless bats, vanished in a whirlwind of leathery wings. Flashing his spotlight across the nearest wall, a shadowy passage popped up in its beam, and Stephen made a run for it. "This way!" he waved to his partner. "Stick close to me and fend them off with confusion!" Hovering backward as swiftly as it could, Matang raised a claw to help aim its sweeping psychic attack. The Golbat were momentarily thrown back by the psychic wave, but they quickly recovered and continued to give chase. But the attack had done its job in buying enough time for Stephen and Matang to duck down the tunnel at their right. Matang needed only a cursory bullet punch to deter the few dogged Golbat that followed them into the tight quarters.